Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Real Talk with ZSJ. I'm here again with my friend Allison. You all may remember her from episode 5. It's a pretty in-depth, intense, I would say, video, and lots of people really enjoyed it. And it's actually been the most watched video that I've done since I started this channel in November, the end of November. So I'm glad to welcome you all back. Happy New Year to everybody as well. Allison, welcome back. People
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed you last time. They were like, man, like, wow,
I
this is
know.
like
Well, you had a lot
PhD
of
level
folks
stuff.
engaged, so that I'm
Yep,
just so excited to be able to get this message out because it's information people need. So thank you.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I guess we'll start off by I think it's appropriate and we can do a little reflection. I'm in the DC area, so we like to do a little bit of reflection on what transpired yesterday and all the things that's happening in our federal and some of our state governments. I know I've been following the events that happened in DC yesterday. I did an interview with CNN earlier. It was with a writer who was writing a piece about it, and they asked me, what did I think? They wanted to know like what I thought about the protesters or the rioters or whatever people are calling them now, the treatment of the police versus how the police treated the protests that happened in DC with the George Floyd murder this summer. So, of course, with media, it's kind of kept into like a small kind of frame. And I did the best that I could to provide nuance because I certainly have a nuanced view of things. So I don't know, just wanted to see if you had any reflections and what you thought about everything that's currently happening right now.
Well, I think things play out a certain way for a reason. I think some of the responses or lack of response or lack of support that would have stopped that, what happened at the Capitol, that was taken into account at the larger situation. My concern is that what happened will continue to further disenfranchise people from access to their elected officials and from the judicial
I'm worried about
process.
that too.
And I think it's really unfortunate that some of the issues that we're going to try to lay out are being framed like the resistance to some of these policies, which I think will ultimately be oppressive to many communities, especially communities that have been historically oppressed, Black and Brown communities. The way in which it's framed continues to make it very difficult for people who are coming from a different frame than a patriot sort of conservative frame to get in that, which is unfortunate because the concerns that I'm laying out here are very real. And, in the best of all possible worlds, I think that this is a continuation of the larger history of enslavement and domination that the country is built on. And so if
You better believe it.
frame of this to a restorative sort of conservative patriot version, we're not actually getting at the root of the problem. So, given how all of these things play out, it makes it harder to have the kind of conversations that, I appreciate that we can have here.
Absolutely. Me too. And I just want to appreciate you for bringing this PhD level information for free to the community and to people, and making sure that we can't hide like ostriches. Like it's not happening. Let's cover up our heads. Anyway, so to the listening audience, please like this video, share it. As you all know, you were here last time with Allison. She is about to lay it out for us. Lots of connecting the dots for a lot of us who already have a sense that something isn't right about like the way these things are being framed, or something isn't right about the way things are being handled in my community. And I have folks on here from California who I know, lots of folks in California and New York as well, with a lot of these draconian bills and things that are being passed. Probably want to hear what you have to say. So without further ado, I'll pull up your screen here so that we can
put it in present mode.
Yeah. So like the video, everyone, make sure you share it. Allison's about to get into it.
Yeah, so maybe I can just do a quick intro for folks who maybe weren't around for the first, who hadn't had a chance to see the first interview. But a lot of what I tried to lay out in my earlier presentation was this idea of what's coming on the heels of the fourth industrial revolution. And this is a global program that's coming out of the World Economic Forum, which is sort of the largest corporate and financial interests in the world. They meet every year in January. Their meeting is going to be coming up. And last January, they rolled out this concept of stakeholder capitalism. And the fourth industrial revolution, as it's going to be advancing, is built on a premise of advancing automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, Internet of Things sensors, smart environments, and synthetic biology and bioengineering. And so in many respects, it's almost remaking life on planet Earth, including but not exclusive to human beings, to fit a more mechanized, streamlined model, from which essentially we become, our minds and bodies become commodities to be mined for data that will feed these new innovative, sort of disruptive financial models. And sort of the short version of this is, if we understood the last global economic crash around housing was these toxic mortgages, that through these new financial approaches, they're going to be creating derivatives products in human capital. They will be profiling individuals as burdens on society, burdens in terms of your use of education or training services, your access to health or housing, your access to behavioral health treatment, nutrition support. All of these things will sort of be tallied up, and you will sort of be measured in terms of your projected worth or burden on society. And you will become an investment opportunity for global investors. This is part of something called the Impact Management Project, which is at least 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders. And these investments are aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so, Zakia, when we talked yesterday about sort of what we might want to start with, is understanding that these human capital markets are going to be advancing globally. A lot of them have already been piloted through ostensible humanitarian aid systems in the global south, but that now the global domestic poor are going to be tied up into these products, these financial debt products. And very much these systems are built on poverty and trauma. So, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, those communities that have suffered the most trauma under sort of the structural nature of racism and racial capitalism in this country, will be the ones who will be on the front lines of being managed in these financial systems. So I just wanted to, I brought up a slide. Most, unless you have occasion to, most people probably haven't, might not know what the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are. I would think for the average, NPR listener or someone, you would think, oh, that means like clean water and reducing greenhouse gases, or that's what the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are a few there that are like that: climate action and life in the water and life on land. There are a few that actually have to do with the environment. The vast majority are about managing the global poor in relation to the environment. So most of the Sustainable Development Goals are about managing people, not the environment. And in many respects, they're about managing people and removing them from the environment, that people are a threat to the environment, and that people are at risk from the environment due to infection, right? Or, pandemic or something like that. And so it advances the premise of Agenda 21, which is really to consolidate most of the global population in sort of compact urban centers, and then leave these like very large open wilderness areas. And that's something that,
do you think that's connected to gentrification, Agenda 21, where they want to push people? So then I guess
it's concentration. It's definitely about creating like more concentrated urban spaces and removing, I think in Minneapolis, in some places, they're actually removing like single family zoning, and they're making changes to create more and more density in city environments. And don't get me wrong, like I live in Philadelphia. I love the city. I think it's great. But the idea that you would potentially make it more or less impossible to live outside of urban areas, I think is highly problematic. And in many areas of the global South, they're actually using corporate environmentalism to remove indigenous communities, like including in Africa and India, off of their lands under the framing of environmentalism. And so, whereas you should be looking to indigenous communities and their relationships to lands as the sustainable venture, this is actually about dispossession in many respects. Although if you're not familiar with the ins and outs of it, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So, oh, well, the tiny homes, yeah. And I think that's going to also be connected to the introduction of Internet of Things sensors in these tiny houses that will sort of be data collection pods about you and your behavior and sort of tracking. They've been doing some pilots for refugee housing with Syrian refugees, where they were putting retinal scans for the doorbell access. And so again, tracking people's use of their shelter structures. And I think that's something that's going to be coming. But I just want to touch base on a few of these goals to talk about them to begin with. So the first one is no poverty. So clearly that is going to affect the Black community because disproportionate numbers of people are, impoverished due to the sort of the nature of the economic system, redlining, lack of ability to secure real estate, and intergenerational wealth. So the poverty aspect is a key part. And then there's another, number two is hunger. So clearly, like we've had tremendous issues with food insecurity, issues with access, especially in urban areas, of food deserts, of people not having access to healthy, affordable food. And even within the school lunch programs, a lot of the options that are offered, I know in the Philadelphia School District, we don't have kitchens. And so most of the food that is very prepackaged, prepared in plastic, microwaved, and it's not healthy food necessarily. I will reference a few years ago, I was looking at a panel discussion I believe it was in Salt Lake City. The Sorensen Impact Center had sponsored it with I think probably the San Francisco Federal Reserve. They're the ones that are developing these human capital bond products. And at the end of the panel presentations about impact investing, which is what I'm talking about, these pay for success deals and structuring them, all of these deals are based on a cost offset. And so they negotiate, the cost offset might be special education services, the cost of dealing with someone who is reincarcerated, the cost of someone who becomes unemployed because of mental health issues. All of those things have a cost, and the fixing people from those problems is what justifies the profit taking for the investor, okay? And so at the end of this panel, there was a woman from the Salt Lake City food pantry, and she said, I'm listening to all of these discussions and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with food, because you talk about all of these issues, but really if people are hungry, you're not going to be able to fix a lot of these problems. If people are hungry, that's a really fundamental issue. And why is it that we're not able to come up with a pay for success deal around hunger? And the gentleman, I think it was actually Ian Galloway, who's from the San Francisco Fed, but he said, well, we haven't figured out the right cost offset. Said we can't track a cost offset to get the profit for the food. And then he kind of posited and he said, well, maybe we could attach it to a third grade test score, right? So you would feed children so that they would test higher.
And all of this, I just want to make sure I'm making the connection. So at the beginning, you kind of gave the introduction, you talked about these human capital like bonds and like how it'll be traded, and people, these 2,000 people or 2,000 groups of what do you call them, high net worth or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, the largest global finance. They could be pension funds, they could be individually wealthy, they could be sovereign wealth funds, they could be a lot of things.
But they will be the ones that will make money off of this kind of like shell game, almost like gambling off of like moving pieces on a chessboard, really? Yeah,
because the problem that we're facing now is this sort of global Ponzi scheme of global capitalism. It hasn't actually fallen apart, but I talk about it going into a virtual world. It's becoming virtualized. And so the economic growth that is not sustainable on the real planet Earth will be virtualized as digital twins in gamified environments, and it will continue to grow as abstract digital commodities in virtual world building in cyberspace. And certainly there's still a a cost to that, the cost in server farms and water, but it's not quite the same as physical manufacturing. And so we're being—
What's a digital twin?
A digital twin is essentially sort of building up a digital replica avatar of yourself that exists in a digital dimension. And they've actually, MIT has developed something called mixed reality. And they're to the point that if you had a digital twin environment, say your office, you had a physical office, and then you have a digital office, and your digital twin works in the digital office and you work in the physical office. If you put your pencil cup and you picked it up off the file cabinet and put it on your desk, in the digital twin room, that would happen too. And so their goal is essentially to digitally twin everyone. And I would say if people aren't watching, haven't seen it yet, there's this creepy show called Black Mirror, and it's sort of predictive programming. And I think there's actually an episode where a woman loses her partner to a car accident, and they sort of give her the option of recreating him from his texts and tweets. And like they create a chatbot version of him based on the text analysis of his sort of digital footprint. But then in the end, like you could upgrade to like a physical robot sort of version. And it's not exactly the same, but it's this idea that the data that we creates a parallel versions of ourselves. And even within Facebook or some of these gamification platforms, they encourage people to like create cartoon, the avatar versions of themselves. And if you imagine that these human capital bond markets are actually built on mining your behaviors, or mining predictive analytics about your behaviors, whether it's actually really you or a digital version of you, they could essentially almost fragment your personality across into multiple avatars, right? Like there could be the professional Zakiya version, like the lion mom Zakiya version. There could be like the, funny friend version. Like you could have all of these versions of yourself living in a digital space, and then they could be extracting, data and value out of your digital virtual reality. So that's sort of the digital twinning, but I can't remember. We were talking about like the third grade test scores and feeding kids.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just want to get back to the woman in the food pantry. Like she was really wanting that to work for her, right? And no one in this audience full of people who are, I would assume if you're there, you're ostensibly there because you care about justice, however you imagine justice is, that someone in the front of the room would say, we can only feed children if we can find a way to create a profit stream for a global investor. That's just not an abomination. And that's what I'm trying to get through to people, is to like wake them up to what this is. They're going to sell you this as something wonderful. And
it's already being sold that way.
Well, I wrote a letter on my blog this week. There's a person, his name is Zach Bush, and he's a holistic doctor, and he's very interested in addressing glyphosate, I believe, like Roundup in the soil and regenerative agriculture. But recently on an interview with Children's Health Defense, he was talking about setting up partnerships with Bank of America to do tabletop gardens at food pantries. And the tabletop model was essentially using pre-packed socks. They called them socks, like tubes of dirt, like specially prepared dirt in plastic tubs. And then they would grow kale and stuff off of this. But if you actually understand sort of the biodynamic nature of like agriculture and life as like a healing process, while growing somebody kale on a tabletop might be a Band-Aid, like might certainly be better than feeding them Cheetos, it's not actually a structural solution. And if that's backed by Bank of America, which is an entity that was fined tens of billions of dollars for fraud on the last mortgage crisis, essentially the irony of Bank of America, like providing a tabletop garden at a food pantry, like someone needs to interrogate this model more and say, like, maybe as a society, we've gotten to the point that we should say that isn't actually an appropriate response. Like we actually have to redistribute the resources to those people who have been disenfranchised so they can become autonomous and have control of their own land and their own food system and provide support if they want it. But like to have Bank of America potentially scaling, because it's always about disruptive innovation and scale, these agricultural products, to me seems to go against the values that this individual, advanced. And maybe he had not really thought of it that way. And so that's what I'm trying to sort of, break this spell and say the impact investing scheme is not what people, it is simply about further concentrating wealth and creating a justification that will create data surveillance of targeted communities. So that's food. So 3 is healthcare. And I tied this in. Sweden just created something called the first health impact bond, and it's tied to diabetes. So of course, that's a chronic illness is a huge concern. It's not just impact investing isn't just centered on diabetes. It's also heart disease and asthma and lead poisoning. And so those are all issues that I know affect the Black community, impoverished communities. A lot of it has to do with the environmental conditions in which they've lived.
Absolutely. Environmental racism is real.
Yeah. So those are all very real concerns. The challenge is that this sort of public health or the social determinants of health are then going to sort of flip around and essentially penalize people to put people in charge of their health. They will make it sound good, like preventative care, but they are not going to clean up your environment. They will try to make you self-manage within a toxic environment and come up with a better outcome. And so the diabetes program might mean that there are these DNA nudge bands that control food access, and that maybe in your food assistance subsidy is tied to that you can only go to Bank of America's Kale Garden and scan your purchases, for your health. And that some of these things are happening. Health impacts are tied to the Heckman equation, which is early childhood investing. So we're seeing things like smart playgrounds with Internet of Things sensors and activities tracked on phones, so that they can get health data of kids to justify, again, that kids can earn a playground with their health data.
So Fitbits on kids, basically.
Fitbits on kids. They're also tying it in it's really gross to literacy. And so they're putting QR codes and scanning bars on playground equipment, so that parents have a phone and they scan a tag, and it will say something like, here's a scavenger hunt, go find a rock, or, but it's all digital, it's all based in the data. Or they will say, look, scan this code and let's read a story together on our phone at the playground. Wow. So natural play is being completely confined into these very rigid parameters. Again, ultimately, I think is to feed these impact markets, because within the Heckman equation, which is the early childhood investor funding scheme, it's 7 to 10% regular, but adding up to 13% if you start to get health data.
So do you think this is I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, because I know I have lots of people who watch who are, probably identify as more socialist folks. And I've been watching some of the commentary around people saying, and I've also seen as a part of an investment group on Facebook that I'm a part of, I've been seeing where people are saying the banks are effed, right? Because of what you're talking about, because of fintech, because of all this. Do you think that they're creating this Heckman equation, and all of these people at the World Economic Forum are reinventing capitalism?
I think it's transitioning to digital, to more digital and interactive with the ubiquitous computing, like surveillance capabilism.
Quantum, yeah.
And I would say, the thing that's really challenging for me, and I have a friend who's, a lovely person who has done a lot of work on co-ops. Right.
Yeah.
And setting up co-ops. And what we realized early on is, guess what? These impact investors are going to set up metrics for worker satisfaction. And so the impact investors are going to start to fund co-ops so that they can improve the worker satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And so, it's going to be really challenging. And I'm not here to say people should just be, that we should never do any projects because we can't find a way to finance them. But what I'm asking is that if more people, when they engaged in these investment programs or granting programs, negotiated with the data and tried to educate or collectively push back on the data collection or the nature of the metrics that were used, that we could start to see some change, right? If that it's being framed often as accountability, right? That we're getting the data to be accountable to the community, when in reality, the way it's structured is that data is being used to justify this scraping off extra profit beyond the supporting the ventures.
Weaponizing the data.
Yeah. I mean, I think we said it last time. If, you know, the idea that if we just had a little more data or more granular data, that there would be a will to fix the problem within the current environment, I think is naive.
Very.
Like, the data-driven society is structured in connection with the surveillance society, because if what they're saying is we need to keep very close tabs on all of this to make sure we're doing right by you, so that we're, you know, shown to be the good people, that means essentially we have that these investors would have like open opportunities to surveil and manage the community they're supposed to be helping. It's very tricky. So education, I have some more maps to talk a little bit more about education, but the shift to screen-based education that will then transition to wearable technology. Gender equality. Girls and women are a huge target for the impact investors. And so especially girls in the global South, and especially around STEM education and girls. And so again, not to say that there aren't inequalities there, but the metrics and how these metrics are used, because a lot of the work in the global South areas, there's stuff being done around women and businesses, but it's tied in with microfinance, which in Grameen Bank, which can also often be very predatory. And so it's laid out as helping women get businesses, but in the end, it's the people who are offering the financing that actually make out more than the communities themselves. And right. I do feel like in many respects, some of the push around the girls and STEM education and coding is that in some ways, and this is my concern, a lot of what we're seeing within the development of data sets to train artificial intelligence is that we really want very robust data sets. And so actually by creating more diverse bases of coding, and I'm not saying that the Black community shouldn't also be into coding, but like they want to train the AI, like they want the feminine, right? They want that hand in it because they want it to be the most accurate representation in this twinning of the world. And so if they can get people to coding it in a way that is reflective of their cultural background, it creates a more robust artificial intelligence program. And then the question is, who is actually in control of those systems and to what end? So there's a lot.
You're not just focusing on women in the South. I would say, based on my experience, especially in the nonprofit NGO world, they're certainly focused a lot on Black women in the United States as well. If you notice, especially I would say in the political arena, if you notice like who's kind of been pushed to the front in terms of speaking for a lot of things, and we can get into the election.
They're very powerful, right? And so if you can capture that population and create, and again, it's a very fine line, right? Because these are people who deserve to be able to realize their dreams, to develop their talents, to be that. But if it happens within sort of a containment zone, they will only ever let it go so far. That's the only way it can ever actually happen. Because if the people who are holding all the resources, the only way that this gets addressed is that, these several hundred billionaires start to re-engineer how that wealth is held. And, that's something that's why I think it's a global problem, because this is transnational global capital that we're dealing with. But if you can placate, if you can keep people in a way that they feel like they're making progress, but keep them contained, that is an optimal situation for these people in power. If people were really frustrated, the system would start to crumble. So they will make sure that people feel like they are making progress, which is not in any way to disrespect the work that people are putting in. I know. But it's hard to talk both sides because, I don't know how we do it. I don't have a clear answer, but, Michael Bloomberg is not into all of these things because he really cares about these communities. It's because it works for his measure of state surveillance and his impact investing. Sorry. Paul Tudor Jones.
Listen, you are safe to tell the truth on Real Talk Uncensored. Do not censor yourself.
Not exclusively, but there is a connection between larger smart city surveillance and impact investing and keeping people so that to keep people that they're feeling heard, but to make sure that they don't go too far. That's just how it is. So, so clean water and sanitation. I'm going to show you a picture later about a smart toilet and biometric anal sphincters.
Oh yeah, y'all can't wait to see that.
In India, they're going to like make sure they know who's sitting on the potty. And this is one. Okay, so this is about economic empowerment. And I want to point out specifically, there's something about connections to opportunity youth. So opportunity youth or disconnected youth are young people ages, I think, 16 to 24 who are not actively in education or employed. So that is a target, a lot of that. It's also connected to financial inclusion and this idea of getting low-income communities to better manage the tiny bit of money that they have. So that is 8. 10 is reduced inequalities, and I'm going to talk about that also, but this is a lot to do with racial equity. And again, you know, I'll show a slide about it later, but I was having a conversation with a friend and we were just talking, and a lot of this is structured as sort of word gaming and word spells and how they have double meanings of words. And it struck me when we were talking about sort of these new diversity trainings and equity, that was diversity, equity, inclusion, that equity, the double meaning is actually as an investment product.
That's true. Stocks are called equities.
Right. Stocks are called equities. So I think that this is actually a very sneaky way of engineering that, I mean, in my mind, justice on a dashboard is kind of hollow, you know, especially if someone is going to make some money off of it. So that equity conversation is important. 11 is sustainable cities, but that is, again, the smart city networks and the smart policing. And then 16 is about peace, justice, and some strong institutions. So this is the prison reform piece, is number 16. And that's the piece that connects to, as we start to reimagine what global incarceration looks like, they are going to use the costs associated with the prison industrial complex, which I talked about previously, as a way to create a giant cost offset for returning citizens, but then using new systems of control for those people leaving the incarceration, you know, system through social workers, healthcare people, retraining individuals, that these nonprofits will be set up to manage people digitally on these various assigned pathways. So it will be, you know, more gentle, perhaps, you know, it will be more gentle natures of control, but it will still be a carceral state. It will just be transformed in a new way. So wow. Those are the main goals that I just wanted to hit on that have, you know, particular impact, I think, for communities, especially the Black community. So
I really appreciate that.
So do you have any thoughts before I click over? I have a few just things to show.
Yeah. So I'm looking here, and I guess I wanted to hear a little bit more about life on land, number 15. What do they mean by that?
That's interesting. You know, I haven't done all of them. And so, I mean, life on, I haven't dug. So for me, I was coming at things from like a social system standpoint. So some of the things around like smart energy and clean, like the oceans and climate action, I have done less of. There's a woman, her name is Corey Morningstar, and she has a blog, Art of Annihilation, I believe, and is her personal blog. And she does a wrong kind of green. She's a contributor there, and she has done a lot around corporate environmentalism and especially the impacts on Indigenous communities, Global South communities around what they essentially have framed wrong kind of green. So using the Greta Thunberg movement, using the Green New Deal as a cover for like continued extraction of resources in developing nations and to being weaponized, essentially using sort of Western colonial practices in these communities. So
the Green New Deal, you talked about that a little bit, or did you? Did you talk? I don't know. So I don't know if you want to maybe share a little bit more about what your thinking is on that, because I mean, let's just be honest. We talked about at the onset, like now, you know, we have a different composition in the Senate. We have a Democratic House Senate and a Democratic president. So it seems like they're the ones who are pushing for, and before I talked to you, I was all on board for the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, reparations for descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. You want to hit on that a little bit? Because I know that is something that we care about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my question when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez like first came out with it, I knew about the impact investing, and I was looking at, Goldman Sachs had a whole divisions of green bonds, these green environmental bonds, including actually a stormwater. I think one of the first ones is a stormwater management bond in the DC area. And so, I know she had been very vocally against Goldman Sachs and taken a position. And so I sort of questioned why was she not aware that this whole global economic system had been structured around the Sustainable Development Goals as an investment market? And, for example, in this stormwater management, like, we've talked, I'll have some slides a little bit later to show about essentially wearable technology creating almost sort of virtual prisons, around people's bodies to extract data for these new financial markets. But what would that look like in a stormwater context, right? And so in our city in Philadelphia, we actually have a pretty progressive water department, and they've been putting in like different sorts of areas of containment, planted areas with native species to retain water so that the water goes into the system more slowly, because like DC, we have very old sewer systems. Our sewers go back to the late 19th century. So there's issues with managing the stormwater runoff. And so the question then becomes, if you fund these deals through impact, if you have a solution that doesn't collect data, that doesn't have a way of collecting data, that solution will not be preferenced for investment, right? So you might come up with a more highly engineered solution that is, I don't know, a series of, concrete traps or sensors or something that would say, oh, it was this flow with this much and this flow later and this can, this many gallons. If you have something flowing across a more naturalized environment, unless, eventually they're going to come up with smart dust for all this stuff anyway, which is really sad. But like a more naturalized solution is probably not going to be as attractive, because until they can find an inexpensive way to collect data in that setting, it will not be preferred. Wow. And so I think these are all the things that I would prefer to see have conversations about, right? If we are going to do these investments, what are the data gathering implications of it? And then again, as we're gathering data through devices and smart environments, what are the health impacts, right? All of these sensors are mined. What are the source impacts of the creation of these materials? Many of these systems run on minerals mined in Africa, the cobalt in Congo, or other countries by child labor often. And so we really need to think very deeply about a data-driven financial model and what the true environmental costs are, what the true human costs are, and if it's actually just to have many of the investors who have perpetuated environmental racism or created like problems of pollution or climate change to then continue to reap profit off of investing in some solution to it. Like essentially you're just paying them money for creating problems by then fixing them. It doesn't really disincentivize the creation of the problems.
Right.
So, I guess that is my larger question. And I don't see, a lot of this is coming out of the impact investing, and the technology is coming out of the Boston venture capital area sort of beltway. And a lot of that is sort of military technology, a lot of the financial institutions. I know she was allied with Markey on that. And, Markey is very close with MIT. So, there are lots of questions about who will ultimately benefit from these. I know like she and Sanders have been talking housing. Like, is anyone saying like, hey, if we do housing, I want to make sure people actually have, access to affordable housing of their choice, and they're not put in a tiny house data pod, where with a retinal scan doorbell that they have to, have a Internet of Things toilet, so that we can, create the financial revenue streams. Somebody needs to tell Bernie Sanders that. Like, does Bernie Sanders know about the casita model out of Austin? Like, because I can tell you these folks do. They know how to make their wealth. These people have 20, 30, 50-year plans of how this is going to happen. And the people at the top who are running these monies, I think their empathy level is pretty low. And some of them may be straight up sociopaths. So the idea of containing people and then using that containment, even though it's perhaps not the same as a current prison, is a different kind of prison. And I often have referenced, because I think what we're seeing is this conjunction of both the lived experience of enslaved communities, people who've been, descendants of enslaved people, and the descendants of people who had been pushed onto reservations, indigenous people.
Right.
And it's the reservation angle that I think in many respects, for our own good and to create these data streams for investment, that we have to ask these questions. So, I mean, I would love for, some of these important people to ask me what I think about impact investing and data-driven government. But, I think at this point, people would prefer not to know, because it's easier that way.
Yeah, the ostrich, like putting our hands in the sand and just, acting like it's not happening. All right, well, I mean,
right, let me go through a couple.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. I know we're excited.
I have to click over. Let me see. Okay, so this, I'm just going to stay on this, if you can see me or whatever. But so this is the smart toilet. This is Stanford Medicine, and this is actually from April 2020, right? So they're right on target. Stanford is all about the wearable technology and the Internet of Bodies and collecting all sorts of data on you. So they're all about the smart toilet will send data about you, to your medical provider. But then there's also, they were talking about using an AI toilet that has a biometrics of when you sit on it. Right. And so if we understand that clean water and sanitation are going to be a revenue stream, very likely the cost offset will be some sort of illness that's related to poor sanitation. So to justify the investment in, say, public toilets in India or some place that doesn't have access to plumbing, very likely they will want to track who used the toilet, how often, and what the reduction of illness was as their cost offset to justify actually giving people toilets.
That's crazy.
But why else would you create an AI scanning, biometric scanning toilet if you're not going to use it for that? That's what they're going to use it for. This, I had mentioned this before, but this is this DNA nudge band. This was developed, I think it was Imperial College London. It's actually the NHS in England has bought these, and they're connected to COVID testing. So clearly there's some aspect of the COVID testing that they're getting DNA samples. And people would say, well, why would you ever use that? I would never scan my food according to my DNA. And actually, in many respects, I think, there's a whole level of eugenics attached to some of this stuff. So we have to, think about, what does that mean? Who gets to eat what food, right? We've decided this is the food you're going to eat. We know that is a way of controlling populations, but it wouldn't be voluntary. Most people are like, well, I would never do that. Well, you would if you can't eat or feed your family because your SNAP benefits, your food assistance benefits are tied to a wallet that makes you scan your choices, which is what's happening. This is a thought experiment. It isn't in place yet in Illinois, but this is how they're anticipating using a SNAP benefit wallet. Whereas if you go to the grocery store, you'll choose the healthy or the non-healthy choice, and they'll theoretically incentivize these healthy choices, until the only healthy choice, until they reduce the benefit that you can only make the healthy choice, but the healthy choice may be impossible if you live in a food desert and work 3 jobs. So these two things touch on hunger and healthcare. And then this is the education is number 4. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But, I can't imagine. I mean, this is a pretty disturbing image for me. I don't know about for you, but these are virtual reality headsets on 3 and 4-year-olds. This is in the UK. And they're really trying to disconnect these children from the real world. Wow. And that there is data collected on eye movement, on emotion, on biometrics, on pulse rates that can come out of these VR headsets that people are not aware that individuals interacting within the headset is also collecting data on how you're interacting with the content presented. So it's really digital brainwashing. This is another piece, these BrainCo, these brainwave monitoring headbands, and these were developed out of Harvard. And then they were piloted in China, and I think eventually China kicked them out. but it's like measuring your attentive focus. Like you would have this augmented reality in a classroom, and you would see who was, you would see who was paying attention. So that's 4. And then I wanted to talk about the reduced inequalities, because a key figure in this is the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The Annie E. Casey Foundation is based in Baltimore. It's also important to notice that Open Society has an office in Baltimore. The Annie E. Casey Foundation is one of the early impact investing pioneers in setting it up in 2002. And so again, I had mentioned about reduced inequalities, that's equity. And they're talking about pursuing racial equity, but it's actually, I think it's covered up a little bit by this comment, but this section below is talking about data, like making sure that you collect all of the data. Yeah, follow the data. The organization should track participant and demographic outcomes. And so once you've set up a situation that you're tracking the participants and their demographics and the outcomes, what you're really saying is that we have free license to track you and your children in under the name of doing equity, performing equity, such as, equity, but it's actually going to be equities, right? And so that's, what I wanted to mention before is that, again, they're based in Baltimore. They started the idea of impact investing in 2002, this Mission Investors Exchange. They initiated it in 2002, and then it was picked up in 2005. So new ways to use capital for impact. So this also includes the Ford Foundation, the Gunn, Heron, the MacArthur Foundation, Meyer Memorial Trust, and the Packard and Prudential and Rasmussen. So there's this small group. And then like now we've got essentially like billions upon billions of dollars in the social impact space. But it's very important to me to understand that when you're seeing equity within a data-driven focus, like within an ostensible social impact focus, that people need to actually understand equity is a framework to feed into these equity markets.
Wow. And they do that through the foundation?
Yeah, well, the foundations provide seed money often to get these programs started. So, there'll be think tanks like the Aspen Institute, like New America, and they'll set up programs, and then they'll provide seed money to start the programs or to backstop the programs until they can scale. Because realistically, even if this was a free market program, they're not sustainable. Like they're not scalable yet. And so they need to be propped up, and they're propped up largely through philanthropic money to get the models lined up. And I think this is an infographic I shared before, but if we're talking about data and tracking and surveillance of communities around health, around education, around housing, I just want to reinforce that if you're developing portfolios of human capital, of individual people, and this will be done through digital identities, digital identity systems and interoperable digital identity systems, the people who will be most attractive for those portfolios are people who can be, according to a data dashboard, according to metrics on a data dashboard, relatively easily fixed. Wow. They want someone who's broken, but not so broken that they can't be improved. And I think preferably improved as a metric. This doesn't necessarily mean they're totally fixing their lives, but that the data on them looks better with minimal investment. That's just how this logic of a portfolio will work. So if there are people who have very difficult life circumstances that have them in a very bad place, but their upside is limited, they will not be attractive. Or if there are people who are, pretty well off, but they could be tweaked a little bit, those won't be attractive. They're looking for a sweet spot in terms of individuals. And so this, this feeds into, I'm going to talk about do a walkthrough of a few maps next. But it's tied to a company called Neo Media, and it's like edutainment. And a lot of these impact markets with the Heckman equation, it's about changing behavior, measurable behavior change. And so this is an equation that came out of Columbia Teachers College. I believe the gentleman's name was Clive Belfield, and he created a cost-benefit framework for curriculum around social emotional learning, which is sort of code word for like, we want to track how your kid behaves and make sure they behave correctly. But, and I think the little bit might be covered up, but it's social impact investment markets in behavior modification. I mean, they just say it right there, what they're doing. They're creating impact markets in modifying behavior. And then this is the app that I want to talk about that is sort of a psychological profiling app. for behavior modification that is framed as sort of a fun, gamified platform that is developed by this company called Neo World. They had research done at Monash University, which is in Australia. And even though the company has a large presence in the United States, it was based in Australia, the parent company. They did research there to show that it was impact, that there was a high impact, and that these were their metrics, that the children were on task, meaning they were playing the game, and that they demonstrated highly appropriate social skills in the game, highly appropriate behavior, and that from that it is beneficial. And that the population that was part of this study was they were kids in an alternative school, right? So they were kids who had been pushed out of the regular school system. They were ADHD, I think autistic spectrum disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. Okay, so these were kids who were identified as having behavioral concerns, right? So they were targeting these specific groups with this behavior modification entertainment program, and that it even said that this program was effective, even though that they conducted the study at the end of the day when their attention levels were lowest. So it's
don't make no sense.
So sad. Like, I mean, could I just, because I know you have a strong feeling about what that's like, and
I do. Absolutely.
I mean, to me, that seems very predatory.
It is. It is. And to think that there's a profit motive behind it.
Right.
Wow.
So I want to walk through a little bit more about Neo World.
Yeah.
So let me see. I'm going to go. I have one more. I think I have one more regular slide. So this is actually there's a whole new division, I think, that most people are not aware of digital medicine, video game medicine. And this company, Achille, was a corporate spin out of research done at the University of California, San Francisco, I believe Neuroscape Labs, Adam Gazzelli. And it spun off into a corporation that was backed by companies connected to the MIT Media Lab. And Duke Medical School did the clinical testing of this prescription video game for ADHD. Okay, so it's a prescribed video game around executive function, and it was just approved for use, I believe, by the FDA. So, but this company, Achille, has backers in many of the major pharmaceutical companies, and I think for most, I think ADHD is a pretty low-hanging fruit because the potential downside is relatively low. I mean, it's not like depression or more serious mental illness. So like, and it's very pervasive. And so that's a large market for them, but they had planned many other digital medical video game types of products for all sorts of mental health conditions. And I think
I am dumbfounded. I'm dumbfounded right now. Time to play for medicine.
Yeah. Time to play your medicine. Yeah. And they were actually testing a similar type of product in the schools in San Jose. This executive function video games. These were not prescription, but they were testing them in classrooms. And I don't think that people,
Did the parents give consent?
Understood.
Did the parents?
Who knows how it was presented to them, right? It was probably presented to them as some wonderful opportunity to engage in STEM education,
And what parent will say no to that, right?
Right. Like, oh, your kid will be on the cutting edge. Look, you're in Silicon Valley and we want you to test our products or whatever. But they're tracking the kids' focus and executive function, which is, again, in this coming world, like we can imagine what, after trying to sort of live on Zoom for 10 months, being able to focus and, proceed with life in this crazy virtual world is very, very difficult, and especially for kids. And, these product lines have all been launched, lined up to teed up for the market shaping that's happening now in mental health, I think. So let me see if I can click over to, so I will stop this screen and I'm going to share a different, so this is, oh, wait a minute. So share screen. I want to get the Neo Media up.
Okay.
Okay. So this is, can you see it? Oh, is it? I'm wondering if I can,
I got it.
you know
I
what,
got it up
if
now.
I'm on this side, can you see my cursor if I use it this
Yeah, I
way?
can see it. Yeah, I'm gonna
Okay,
make
so
it
I'm
bigger.
just going to stay in this view so I can sort of zoom in and walk around a little bit. So this is this Neo Media Group. So this is the one that they said that they were targeting for ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, special needs students. Okay. Um, the company itself was based in Australia, the city of Melbourne, and it was actually developed with tax credit money from the Australian government. Okay. This gentleman, James Kellett, I believe, is the executive director and the contact, and he was part of an equity fund. Okay. They have a division in the United States called Neo World. Neo World, actually, maybe it's not just the United States, but there's one in the United States. There are other cities that it's connected to. It had offices at one time in San Francisco and in New York, but also ties to London and Manila. So it's a global venture. You can see that we have Australia, the United States, England, and the Philippines. Neo World created this gaming platform that was sort of these cartoon characters, sort of a hero's journey set of gaming protocols. Again, as you can remember from the slide, their focus was on highly appropriate behavior. So training people to have good behavior, likely within sort of a hero's journey, cartoon, superhero setting. And that children would earn these badges, the Neo badges. And that they had actually set up a partnership with the National Parent Teacher Association to fundraise for this program. Neo World developed a homeschool academy, so that the program was not only to be used within a regular K-12 school environment or an alternative school environment, but also as a homeschool app. And you can imagine now under lockdown that is probably an attractive option for people to be made available. And it will be interesting to see what school districts offer in terms of home-based access to this gaming app. They were selling special packages, COVID-19 packages to school districts. And then
Wow.
this homeschool academy actually had the members, if you were a member of the homeschool academy, you had access to a private Facebook group for children. Okay, so that the Facebook had a hand in accessing the kids as well. So the focus was social emotional learning, and the research that was done on this game was through this What Works Clearinghouse. The What Works Clearinghouse is a project of the Institute of Education Sciences, and these are some of the other partners and things that the Institution of Education Sciences is funding around social emotional learning. So EASL Lab is a social emotional learning platform, this Nudge Solutions Lab at the University of Virginia, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and this collaborative academic social and emotional learning. That's a big center in Chicago that's funded by the Novo Foundation, which is Warren Buffett's son. So the Institute of Education Sciences is very interested in research around social emotional learning, which is, to my mind, like behavior modification. And then the university that did the study that said this was such a great product is Monash University. It's in Australia, I believe in Melbourne. And these are other programs at the university. So they have a blockchain technology center. So again, we've talked about using these apps being part of a digital education voucher on blockchain, and the blockchain being the basis for these human capital bonds. They have a Center for Health Economics. The health economics is part of the overall nudge for good health. And they have a very robust digital education group. So this university is involved in these different, Cicero is sort of an affiliate, and they are have done work on programmable blockchain money. So if you imagine that in someday your quote unquote education access may be tied to a digital wallet, that your child gets a digital wallet to pay for edutainment to earn skill points, and it's done not in a regular school setting, although it may be, but it could be now you're homeschooling, right? You're schooling from home, so that you've got this special academy with a Facebook opportunity, and you can earn badges for good behavior, right? And that's how this is set up. Now, the first pilot for this project was actually a program called Neo Junior, and this project was piloted in Guangdong province in China. So it was piloted in partnership with China Mobile, which is the People's Republic of China telephone company, or one of several, I think, but a major one. It was a company called Smart Trans Holdings, which does online payment platforms and sort of manages these, they call it micro subscriptions. So it's how you would pay for an app like on an iPad. So this is how this infrastructure works. And they have framed this product as edutainment, and it's gamified, and it's tied to these device-based technologies in online learning. So that's sort of the framing. It's online learning gamification that you pay for an app with a subscription. But the community in which it was piloted is the same community where people on parole were tracked on blockchain in smart cities tied to their social credit score.
What? I mean, so for new listeners who may not know what a social credit score is, can you just go through that really quickly to make the connections for people?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I forgot to put Lou Rosenberg in there. Essentially, I mean, a lot of people talk about the social credit score in China, and it is, a thing. It's the idea. There are government ones, and then there are ones tied to major retailers where your digital footprint, or increasingly perhaps your behavior in public settings that is captured on camera as being a good citizen or not, gives you a ranking that either unlocks privileges or withholds privileges in terms of things like travel, visas, preferred access to different things like that. So it's based on, we've always had social credit scoring, and I'm sure you all, your audience is very familiar with the ways in which the credit systems are meant to advantage certain communities over others, right? I mean, so a lot of the idea of credit scoring is very deeply embedded in U.S. society. And gosh, I asked somebody to pull that record for me, and then I forgot to throw it in the slide. But there's actually a gentleman, I believe his name is Larry Rosenberger, who's out of Marin County Promise, which is part of the Strive Together program. And Strive Together did a whole special working group on social emotional learning because they were so very interested in it. And Larry Rosenberger, he was one of the key people in implementing for many years the FICO scoring systems, and also many other data analytics programs. So it is China, but it's not exclusively China. It's also very much the Bay Area. And but you can go into China in because the infrastructure is already set up to pilot these programs. So we have Foshan, which is a city where this community correction program was tracking parolees on blockchain. The district of Chengcheng, which is in that province as well, they have a blockchain technology e-government program that's connected to the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. That's based in New York, right? There's a lot of fluidity between China and the US. There are e-government digital identity apps in this community. So the idea of e-government, of digital identity, of blockchain tracking people in smart environments and scoring their behaviors is very present. Shenzhen is another one of the cities. They have a smart city pilot. They had a conference in 2019 about China and also building an inclusive, happy home. And there were some gentlemen from the Bay Area who attended that conference. And it's connected to Huawei and FutureWay technologies and virtual reality. So it's very deeply embedded in this idea of ubiquitous computing and scoring people and risk profiling people in smart environments. And the fact that that is where they would choose to test this social behavior app is very compelling to me, especially because the company is in Australia, but they're piloting it in China. Has ties to Facebook. And I just want to say, so Foshan, Deloitte did a whole investment prospectus around that city. And some of the other things Deloitte is involved with are sustainable impact investing for hedge funds, right? So what I've been talking about here, high impact learning technologies, that's ed tech, smart Medicaid, so that's Internet of Bodies, ALICE, which is the working poor. It's the United Way's program around the working poor. They're on that program.
What's Internet of Bodies for people who may not know that terminology?
Internet of Bodies is essentially the idea that you will start to use wearable and implantable technology to track your life systems, and kind of like the smart toilet is almost the Internet of Bodies. Like it's tracking. It's tracking both your health status as well as your movement in the world. and it could be something like the Internet of Things is as small as you holding your phone, right? Like you holding your phone is part of the Internet of Bodies, but it could be your Fitbit. It could be that you have now a pill cap that says, did you take your medication? And there's a sensor on the pill cap that knows how many times a day you opened it. If you're supposed to take it twice a day, it will keep track.
That's crazy.
They're talking about ingestible technology. So like a pill that you would take that you would actually, track your biomedical stuff as it goes through you. I mean, they've had those for a while now, like your gastroenterology stuff. They're also talking about, implantable biosensors and ones that are tied to nanotechnology that are actually part of this DARPA hydrogel project where nanotechnology uses your cells as computers and syncs you to the internet. So there's like many levels of the Internet of Bodies that are connected. The Internet of Bodies, like, I don't know if DC has them. We have them in Philly, those bikes, share bikes. Those bikes?
Yeah, we do. They're all over. Yeah, they're everywhere. Now they're even in Dayton now.
Yeah, that's going to be the Internet of Bodies. Because guess what? You're not going to have your car. They're going to make you ride those bikes. And then they're going to know if you went up the hill or not. And they're going to know like what your, heart rate was. They're going to know, like, when I, ride my bike, did I take the steep hill home or did I go a little longer and go the less steep route? And they will know that because they can track you in real time because those bikes all have sensors on them.
Oh, wow.
And people aren't thinking about that. They're controlling food systems, which is this Lancet Commission on Food, remaking the food system, artificial intelligence, and then Benefit Lab that's running these the pay for success partnerships, like these benefit corporations. So Deloitte is deeply embedded in all of this data-driven biological management stuff. And then they're partnered in doing a prospectus around the city in China. So, it frustrates me quite a bit when people are saying, oh, the Chinese Communist Party is coming after the United States, well, who's going after who here, right? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Clearly there are deep interconnections. And to my way of thinking is that, it is the powerful over the vulnerable, and that is the masses of the vulnerable are the people who should be united globally and speaking up against being managed in this way, like managed in these government data systems, no matter whose government it is. So, I'm just going to go over here and then I'll maybe take a pause and I'll see if anybody has questions. But so in a minute, I'm going to talk about Franklin Lieberman. Franklin Lieberman is an interesting character because he was actually part of the New York State Conference of the NAACP. And when there was a resolution that passed in the summer of 2019 in which the vast majority of delegates to the national meeting of the NAACP that year, it was in Detroit, voted in favor of a resolution that would oppose linking access to any public benefit to the requirement of someone making a digital identity or blockchain identity. So like you should not have to be blockchain to go to school, to get food stamps, to get a housing voucher, to get access to Medicaid or Medicare. And it was passed overwhelmingly. But the New York, specifically the Brooklyn chapter of that group, was the only one that abstained, and they had actually sought to weaken the provisions of that for ed tech. And now we can see why, because they were actually connected to this Neo World product. So it's clear that blockchain is going to very likely be part of this educational app space. In New York City schools, they are actually have implemented this with special needs populations in District 75, the special education division of the New York City schools. And it was done with support from the Verizon Foundation as part of this digital promise. And there's an individual, Hazel Dukes, who was a former president of the NAACP. And my understanding is, she was early on part of the civil rights movement. She's, an elder in the space, but she was in support of this agreement of setting up neo media in the New York City schools. So, and again, it is framed as the digital divide, and they're putting devices in the hands of these children, but at the same time, they're not being fully open about the nature, like all of the other stuff that lies behind it, which is the stuff that I like to talk about. Right.
Yeah. So it's not informed consent. There was a couple of things I was thinking about, like just observing, this map, and it's a lot. It's just it's kind of sickening a little bit, to be quite honest with you. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about what informed consent could mean. There was a comment that said, well, I just want to opt out. How can I opt out? Is that even an option?
Well, I mean, it's hard to do individually, right? And so that's what I'm trying to change the narrative. And I think for the longest time, it has been that, a device in the hand of all of the children is automatically a good thing. And it is true that not having access to that is a disadvantage in the world that they are building. I guess, given that a lot of your audience is people who have, perhaps more revolutionary ways of looking at things, of not just a tweak, but we actually need something better.
Right.
That we need to actually reframe the conversation entirely and say, do we want to prepare children to live in a global digital prison and make sure that they're well suited to that? Or do we want to stop the global digital prison? And, I'm not in a position of telling communities what they should be doing, but I'm trying to give people the backstory to say, what I would be questioning is to say, maybe the option isn't to make them live in the global digital prison and code it. What are our other options? And then to organize around that, organize around what makes sense for the community.
Right.
So I can talk to, I think Neo, wait a minute, let me just, so I'm going to stop this one and I'm going to go over to the people for a second, and then I'll be done with Neo Media.
Okay.
Because it's very interesting. So Franklin Lieberman's background is interesting. So here's the people.
I wanted to say, while you're looking for that, is this I guess, what would be your definition of, because this sounds like a technocracy, right? Like, is that how you would describe all of this Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, Internet of this and connect this, digital that?
I mean, so it's interesting. The more I've dug into all of this, and, I'm still learning. Like, nobody really expects to train to have to know these things, right? So I don't claim to be the ultimate expert in anything. I go wide and I look at a lot of different things. And what I'm increasingly feeling, especially as I'm looking into the push around nanotechnology, these sciences that are working at levels that deny that aren't even operating on the same level of physics that we understand them, that, like, scientists are stretching the world into areas that, in my respect, they seem like mad scientists. Like, why would you go there if you don't know what the kind of wreckage that you're going to cause, what the long-term consequences, the damage that you're going to cause doing this work? But electrical is a huge piece of this. And it feels like there's a split, because on the one side, we are electrical beings, we are beings of water and electrical impulses, and the world is electrical, and it is this sort of natural energetic fields, electrical fields, both like on the planet and cosmologically. And that's from like just a mechanical standpoint, but also from like sort of a spiritual standpoint. Mm-hmm. And then you have these other systems that are also about electrical engineering, but they are attempting to redirect those natural energetic systems in ways that control and limit and contain and allow certain groups to have power, hold power over other groups and beings. And so I feel like there's this, I hate to pick one language about it, because I think there's people who are really invested in being technocracy. There's people who are invested in being communitarianism. There are people who are invested in saying it's socialism or communism. There are people who are invested in saying it's global stakeholder capitalism. Like, there's all of these things. And once you pick one, people will say, well, that's not the one I'm in. And then they don't want to talk about it anymore. And so what I'm trying to say is, like, this is a system of power, of dominating power, that I think in many respects is grounded in a white, Western, Eurocentric, man above nature, lack of humility about the larger world.
Wow.
A better word, like, that's how it feels to me. And that's why I keep emphasizing, like, the importance of a more indigenous worldview, meaning indigenous peoples of the world, of Africa, of India, of Turtle Island, of Europe even, but people who are connected to those natural systems, not the so-called Enlightenment, which is where I kind of run afoul of a lot of the patriot framing, the founding fathers framing, the enlightened scientists, that I don't know how enlightened the Enlightenment actually was. There are many, many terrible things happening during the Enlightenment, ostensibly.
Amen. This is
Right?
it's crazy how they use the language. It's the Enlightenment, but it was terrible for so many other people. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, like the way I'm feeling about it is it's sort of about humans being connected with natural systems, knowing our place in the natural world and being respectful of that and one another, and trying to work towards remedying that harm. And then there's another version that says a more eugenics centered framework about social control, about small groups knowing what's best and imposing their will on everyone else and on nature for our own good, and that is a mechanized system that uses sort of high science and technology and military technology to achieve that end. And to me, that's kind of where the split comes, but I'm probably an outlier in that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for going through that. Well, I know you got another map up here. Let's go through it.
So yeah, so I just want to, I want to speak to Mr. Lieberman because he's very interesting, and I get a lot of this off of people's LinkedIn, and I will just put a little caveat out there that this is a software platform that I guess I used to use called littlesys.org, and it's funded by quite a few of the impact investors, including Open Society, and they kicked me off this week because they didn't like the maps I was making.
And, oh, wow, you're making too many connections. And
there were a lot of connections. These maps are dangerous products, evidently, and so wow. I actually, for the past 3 years, I put so much of because this is all, I enter this data. I hand enter every single connection here. I entered by hand. This is actually a lot of piecework. It doesn't happen automatically. Right. And so for 3 years, I layered everything I was finding in that to let me make these maps. And then they essentially wiped over 350 maps off their platform in one swoop. Whoop, they just deleted 350 maps in the memory hole, I guess. So there were many people out there who were incredibly supportive and generous in speaking on my behalf. And at least at this point in time, the maps have been restored for the general public, although my IP address is still banned. So I cannot access the site directly, but I have a lovely friend who's given me a gift of backing them up offsite and giving me a workaround so that I actually have access to my work still. But I think it shows you the power of what we're up against right now to know that information is power, right? The information reframe the narrative is power. And that is why we shouldn't give up, because the more people who understand what is at stake and the nature of how this power is being deployed and they can interrogate it more clearly, the better chance that our kids are going to have, and grandkids going forward. So, yeah, I know, right? So thank you everybody who emailed on my behalf. So this is Franklin Lieberman, and again, he was with the New York State Conference. There were individuals within the Brooklyn chapter in particular that had opposed this blockchain resolution. Franklin Lieberman was sort of present at that meeting and sort of looking to find out to see how much people knew about blockchain education. And so why would he want to know all of that? Well, this is his background. It is in media. So he, according to his LinkedIn, had been producers in various, all of the major TV studios, NBC, ABC, CBS, public broadcasting, that he was a business partner with this person, Ego Cantor, in 20th Century Films and Columbia Pictures. So he's part of all of this media. He was doing a lot of consulting work through this KenCast and Entmark, which were sort of vague. I could not find much of a presence online for these companies. But through that, they were doing PR, public relations, and marketing consulting for many major pharmaceutical companies. So Pfizer, Warner Lambert, Johnson & Johnson, and Hoffman LaRoche. His company actually did the PR product launch for Valium. I want to say that again, Valium. Okay.
The medicine that people take, Valium?
Yeah. Yes,
wow.
I believe the anti-anxiety maybe. So when we're talking about video games as addictive behavior management platforms, like this is the next medicine, and it's Valium. He also did a lot of work for IBM, and IBM is a central factor in blockchain education and almost like an education currency in blockchain. So again, we're going back to Neo Media. Hazel Dukes was the, I think, is the contact between this company and the NAACP. She had been the president of the National NAACP for a number of years. And it's interesting, she got her start back in
the National or the New York?
She was part of the National and the New York as well. The National for sure. And then I'm trying to think, I have to double check if she was New York. Yes. Former president of the New York State Conference and former president of the National. That was just for a few years, I think maybe 3 years. I think there were some issues that came up, maybe with the state conference. But she got her start in sort of the Great Society doing Head Start work on Long Island and economic development, like workforce development in Long Island, but then was appointed by David Dinkins to the New York Off-Track Betting Corporation. So she spent most of her career in the off-track betting, which you can imagine, like in greater New York City, what that milieu must have been like. Eventually she became the president of that, right? So that's an interesting connection. She was a trustee at Stillman with American Baptist churches and the SUNY system. So she moved in with Neo Media into New York and into these programs, and she was, honored by the Senate, and but that is sort of that connection. The curriculum designer for this, her name is Deneen Jimerson, and she came out of the Denver area. Colorado is on the leading edge of blockchain education and skills credentialing. And she had done some scoring work for Pearson, but came out of Denver Public Schools in Douglas County, which are schools that were sort of deeply invested into sort of, disruptive education models, for lack of a better word. And she was a curriculum director for an online learning called Fablevision. So that's the curriculum. And then the other direct New York connection is this person, Jeffrey Huart, who did educational projects for the NAACP in New York State, but he also worked for the American Federation of Teachers. He was a former teacher in the public schools. And I think, actually, Deneen Jimerson had ties to the New York City Special Education Division. She was part of middle school learning. So she was a tie to New York City schools. And then Huart was, as well as the union rep for the AFT and the UFT. So that's sort of how this whole system got embedded, not only into New York City, but especially targeting special education students, which, as we know, was what they were saying. That's the behavior modification, and sort of autism was sort of a focus of that product. And then there was another advisor in game-based learning. And again, I talked before last time a little bit about hedge funds and the use of game theory in risk profiling and making financial bets. So when we talk about gamifying education, we also have to understand that really the real-time data flows connecting gamified education into game theory and hedge funds is very much related. He's based in Indonesia, I believe. Interesting. I'm just kind of pointing out how global this is. And then the person in curriculum, Laurie O'Donnell, is in Scotland and had a very long career in all sorts of, was connected to University of Edinburgh, had been a teacher in the city of Dundee, and Abertay University in Scotland is one of the key universities in game-based learning in Europe, and they were doing all sorts of development of coursework around getting people to develop games, gamified learning. And so this Laurie O'Donnell was connected in Abertay and the UK Center for Game Design. I think I must have gone off track here, but that's down here. And this Future Skills, Nesta is an impact investing venture fund in the UK. Memory Box, I think, is around Alzheimer's, and these different sort of impact projects around education, and also youth health. That's in the this Dundee where they were based. It was a youth health center. And again, we need to think Internet of Bodies and layering of data. But this person in Scotland, is very much tied to the gamification development. So you've got Scotland, you've got Indonesia, you've got the New York NAACP, have this individual who is, has a long-standing career in media production and direct marketing campaigns for pharmaceutical companies as well as technology companies. And, it's a lot, but I think people need to sort of unpack what actually is behind these apps that kids are using and why are they using them?
Well, Jesus.
Because
Yeah.
it's data extraction, really. And especially in the case that they are targeting, I mean, to me, that study that said, oh, and we did the study at the end of the day when the kids were at their wits' end and it still worked. To me, that broke my heart because it's almost like, we're going to wait till you're at your weakest point and shove this video game in your face.
Right. Wow. And somebody's making money off of that.
And somebody's making money off of that. So I have two other maps that are linked to Bridges International Academies that show a little bit more the ties between the online education in Africa, but I know we're at 9:30, so I don't know if we want to like save those for later and let, if people have questions or you just want to have more open discussion.
Yeah, so if people have questions, you can put them in the chat, and you know, we can field those questions. I definitely don't want to keep you as long as we did last time, but if you want to, if you're up to it, I'm up to it. If you want to go over maybe one more map, and then give people a chance to put questions in the chat, and then maybe by the time we're done with that map, we can go through those questions. That sound good?
Yeah, that's good. So here, let me pick up another one.
I love these maps, by the way. I'm glad that you got access.
They wanted to kick them out, right?
Yeah, I think you're making too many connections to the liberals, really. I mean, when you got the NAACP in there, that's not a right-wing group. Let's just be honest.
Well, and like I said, the vast majority of people approved the resolution against blockchain identity when it was explained to them by someone who knew and understood it within a structural, the context of structural racism. Like they could unpack that this isn't the liberation that people are selling, the community. And, this is a very well-respected individual, and it people got that, right? But it was the individuals in the room who had a financial interest that would be, for which that would be a stumbling block, who were the ones who were opposing it. And people, I think very few people are willing to consider that our children are being used as an extractive resource. I mean, especially Black children, because I have to say, in my experience as a parent in the Philadelphia public schools and a parent of a student in a magnet school, the children in the magnet schools are treated differently than the children in the neighborhood schools, and the children in schools that have the greatest need and the children who need the most support are often just sat on devices all the time.
And that's what's getting ready to happen now. I'm glad you actually mentioned that. I don't know if you saw my Facebook post, but I was livid because there was an article in the Baltimore Sun this week that said, Maryland schools are mostly still online across the entire state, while other states and other places across the nation have figured out a way to open up, whether it's hybrid. And the unions, I just saw today, Newark and in New Jersey, the union fought to keep the schools online, at least until April. So I'm starting to think, and now that y'all saw the AFT on the last, I'm saying it, not you, but
they're reimagining education. The leadership.
Education. And now, these are kids that, let's just be honest, some of the teachers, especially when you said autism, the kids with the behavior issues like this, they're not going to tell us it's not informed consent. They're not going to tell the parents, oh, God, yes, I ain't got to deal with that kid no more. Just put him on a surveillance table and give him this, and he can just go sit over there and learn. Yeah. And that's what's happening.
That's what's happening. And even with the homeschool, like they're often not meeting the needs, the IEP needs of those students. Like they are intentionally, the districts.
And this is a way around
it out. And they say it's cheaper for us to pay the occasional lawsuit of the parent that successfully goes up against us than to just not fulfill the obligations of the IEPs and make parents leave, because most parents don't have the resources to fight them.
Yep.
That's how it is. So they send them home, but then what did they go home to? Right? Because a lot of these kids have parents who work, what are those good options? It's barbaric the way we treat these kids. So I pulled this map of Bridge International Academies. I actually made it for another project, but I think it's relevant here because a lot of the idea for both online learning and what's going to be called a low-cost private school or micro schools, which I think is going to be what's going to come in to fill this gap of people who are disaffected from online learning, or like public schools with really draconian sort of health standards in the schools that are really damaging kids. They're going to be driven to alternative options, these micro schools, low-cost micro schools. The early model of this is coming out of quote unquote development aid connected to the International Finance Corporation and the World Bank. So remember, education is United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, and it has to be done digitally so that they can get the data to run the impact markets for the impact management project. Okay, so that's why all of these children can't have regular books and regular paper. They all have to be through devices so that the World Bank and the investors in the International Finance Corporation can run the deals that they want. Okay, and it's linked to goal 4. The tracking and the data analytics goes through the systems approach for better education results, SABRE. So this is data-driven education. This is tied in with, again, I want to emphasize this as a colonial project. A lot of this is coming out of the UK. These are companies that are colonizer countries. So the UK is advancing a lot of this. So Owen Barter, who is an aide to Tony Blair, was on staff of the United Kingdom Department of International Development, which is sort of their quote unquote humanitarian aid that was addressing data-driven education and these development impact bonds. That's what I'm talking about, pay for success, social finance, pay for success, social impact bonds. Development impact bonds are social impact bonds for the global South. You know, they're prey for these structural adjustment projects. So they need education. So here's the Educational Technology Hub, again in England, based in England. And then they've got Knowledge, Evidence, and Learning for Development program. So evidence, that's again data. So you have to show evidence that you're learning, and the evidence is the data for these deals. So Bridge International Academies is a program that was invested in, has support from a lot of technology companies, and also the MIT Media Lab, which we have spoken of. I'm not sure if we spoke of it before, but the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, much of this is coming out of Boston area military and venture capital. MIT Media Lab is also in charge of digital currency, the Enigma project, which is getting data analytics off of encrypted data on blockchain, the Data Pop Alliance, which is more data. And I believe there is a Data for Black Lives initiative that is connected to MIT, or MIT Media Lab is housed there.
Yeah,
so they want all of that data. And this like laboratory for social machines. This is an institute where they want children to like snuggle up to robot pets and get their data that way. And then the auto ID labs, which are like these RFID chips and barcodes and supply chain tracking, which will be us. So this is all the kind of stuff that's embedded in the Media Lab. It was actually developed in large part by a gentleman named, I believe it's Nicholas Negroponte, who is John Negroponte's brother. Now, John Negroponte, like as part of the US federal government services, like went around disrupting governments of Latin America and many other governments all over the world. So on the one hand, you have the brother who is like fomenting coups in other countries. And then you have another brother who's like doing cutting edge technology. So they've invested in this model of education, which is Bridges International, which they're pitching to countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and Liberia, and then also India. They're pitching this online education, which is called like low cost private schools. And so the idea is that parents will pay like $1 a day or some like relatively low fee for quote unquote education. But the way the education is delivered, it's all curated content on devices that comes out of Boston. So it's actually like people in Cambridge sending the educational content to Kenya, and then the teacher stands in front of the class and just reads it.
Wow.
So you can imagine it as like a colonial project. If you wanted to essentially control the society of another country, like in a soft way, you would just essentially hijack their whole education system and teach them only what you wanted them to know.
Yeah.
And you get them all surveillance devices, right? And so that's where like the Negropontes in both like the global like geopolitics sphere, John and Nicholas, is so interesting at this connection of MIT Media Lab to Bridges International. And you can see these are other investors. So Omidyar Network is very much involved in digital ID. The Gates Foundation, of course, Pearson, which is a big, the testing company. There's Khosla Ventures, different European Investment Bank, the Netherlands Development Finance, Triodos, Novastar Ventures. Like, these are all companies that are investing in, think about, like, thousands of children in these countries. And many of the governments eventually tried to kick them out because they realized that it was not good, that what was happening with this education model was not good.
When you say tried to kick them out, were they successful, or do the global...
I'm trying to remember if it was like Kenya or Liberia. I mean, for a while when I was writing on it, I actually had a bunch of people from Kenya who were like, can track data analytics on your website. And I was getting a lot of hits from Kenya because I think people were getting, there's a lot of critical, if you look up Bridges International Academies and their ties to Facebook and Gates, there's quite a bit of critique. Although I believe that there was one individual who went in trying to expose what was happening and who was like put into jail. So, there is clearly a lot of money, right, riding on data extraction through online education of children whose interests may very well be caught up in just running data for these larger markets and may have nothing to do whatsoever about their own well-being and their own future autonomy. I will say one of the other investors is Rethink Education. You can see here, Rethink Education is also invested in American prison data systems, right?
Right.
So it's very interconnected. And, this is a piece that I still have to write, but the global director for the Liberia program, his name is Seth Andrew. And Seth Andrew was involved in Bridges International Liberia. He was also connected to Democracy Prep Charter Schools and is in the process of launching a new, what do they call it? Low residency boarding program. They took over a small college in Vermont called Marlborough College, and they're implementing a boarding program where kids from Harlem are shipped up to this mountaintop campus to do socially distanced boarding school with virtual reality education.
What do they mean by virtual reality education?
I don't know if they're coding it, if they're using it, but it is very much about sort of this cutting edge, because you can see here Nubian VR. That's the virtual reality, like teaching kids to learn in virtual reality as like project-based environments, wearable tech environments, was tied to Bridges as well. And this IMSI 3D is more virtual reality education. So there's quite a few countries here that are piloting virtual reality learning, because essentially it's really terrible. I think it was in this IMSI one. These are backed by the UNICEF Innovation Fund. They said, well, we're never really going to be able to afford education for those children, and they're never going to learn to read, but they can code with gestures.
What?
Yeah. So they're going to find some way of using hand gestures in virtual reality to do like sweatshop work coding for this virtual prison world. And that's why it's so important to make these connections between these apps and the education systems and what they're doing in these countries. Because, the day will come that we are Liberia, like the poor of the United States, that we are treated exactly the same way. We're not far from that already.
We sure aren't.
And we need to acknowledge that. We need to understand the colonial aspect. We need to understand the military aspect, and we need to understand this development aid, and that really it's about all of these black dots up here getting paid because of United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4 education data that's running through the World Bank and the Finance Corporation.
Is running through the World Bank and the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
I mentioned, so a lot of people don't know who Klaus Schwab is. And I don't know if you want to maybe share a little bit about who that guy is and how he's connected to all of this.
I don't know the deep bio. Essentially, the World Economic Forum is sort of this largest consortium of the most powerful, corporate and financial actors. And he started it in the mid 1970s. So this isn't, in these days, people hold down jobs, like 3, 5 years, 18 months. No, this guy has been in it since like 1975. And I believe it's closely associated with the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations, and sort of this idea of really advancing a global control system around an engineered society. But to my mind, they haven't had the technology to actually implement it until, they haven't been able to implement it until now that they've got the satellite systems, the 5G systems, and the digital identity systems. It seems more likely that they're going to be able to pull off sort of this one world new order for our own good under the guise of climate, the environmental situation and global poverty, I guess. But he looks like an evil, no offense, but he sort of cultivates the character of he's an older man and he's very dour, and he looks like, if you were writing one of those Neo world stories, he would be your arch enemy, I think. He doesn't really try to conceal it, but he is sort of a puppet master. And that's what I keep saying, is that while, I don't want to downplay what has happened recently around the elections, I feel like in many respects, this is all orchestrated. It is orchestrated to pit people against one another so that they don't know about Klaus Schwab. So they're not looking at Davos. They're not looking at the World Bank. Maybe they're pointing fingers and saying it's China, when a lot of these entities, these hedge funds, are based in New York and Silicon Valley and Boston. That is much more complicated than people would like there to be one easy bad guy, that we could take on. But because these hedge funds are also investing our pensions. If you're fortunate enough to have a pension fund or a 401k or some money on the side, they're going to be investing in these things too. So I did a whole discussion around Israel, social finance Israel, because they're the start.
I know, I watched it.
And then now they're the impact nation. And what I'm trying to say is, moms in Israel, this line of economic development that seemed to boost your country into this good situation, actually it means that your children, that your communities will be invested products for global hedge funds too. Like, nobody gets to stand outside of this game unless you own a private island and you can defend it. So we're all in it. We're all part of it. And we're all in different parts of it. Right. And so I think it needs a collective awakening to what it actually is. And that's why I feel so strongly that the Black community and the Indigenous communities are so vital. Their voice in this is that your lived experience of understanding living in a broken social contract, a contract that was never offered to your people from the beginning, that this is the logical extension and that it has to all be made right in that context.
That's funny you say that, the Black and Indigenous community. So these people clearly know the power of, especially I think in the United States, the power of the Black community and why they go to organizations like the NAACP to get endorsements and say, hey, look, the NAACP thinks it's great. Let's go. I've seen that. And the kind of work that I do, I've seen a lot. So I'm not surprised when I see NAACP or some other kind of Black organization or civil rights organization attached to some of these things. But the other side of that, right, is what we've talked about earlier, and what you mentioned is we also have been historically oppressed, and we certainly don't have intergenerational wealth. So if somebody's writing you a check for $1 million to say, hey, can you sell this to your community?
I know that.
Let's just be real about it. These guys are writing checks.
I know. No, I get it. I hear you. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is
I know. I get
those
it.
of us who are maybe in lesser positions, and that's why I feel like I'm in a position to say some of the things that maybe other people can't, is that if I plant seeds, or if I try to say, I work in an institution, and I'm just, but have stood up in terms of funding situations to put parameters on what we're willing to do and not do about data and collecting and
that's right.
and educating those, because I have to say, I would suspect that a lot of the, managerial class in those foundation settings, their parents, they're not, like they're you and me. Like they don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to do evil on the world. I'm going to partner.
No, that's right. Yeah.
They're actually not. And
No.
so, and honestly, if I didn't know about nanotech and I didn't know about like the common pass and that this idea
Did
of
you define that? I don't think we talked about Common Pass. Can you define what nanotech and Common Pass is for people?
oh, sure. So common, I do so many podcasts, it's hard to remember which one I say on which piece.
Yeah, I know.
So this idea of biometric identity, that you will have a digital pass, like a passport, right? And again, this is grounded in the idea of slave passes, right? Or in apartheid, South Africa, apartheid passes.
Having your papers to travel. Where's your papers?
Where's your papers? And that limits your mobility, that limits your access to employment, that limits your access to education. That this digital system is being put in place by something called the Commons Project, that is backed by the Rockefeller Foundation and the World Economic Forum. And they're both advancing stakeholder capitalism. And they have at least 3 products now. The first one that people may have heard of is around airport access, right? That if you want to fly internationally, that you need this pass. And I think that's the soft launch, because people will be like, oh, I never go overseas, or that doesn't seem terrible, I could do that. But what they're not telling you is already in the lineup is a pass to access education and your job, and then another pass to monitor real-time health data. So that's the Common Pass project. That is part of the biosecurity state that will be the global prison, that will say, can you leave your house today? Okay, you can leave your house, but you could only go 5 miles from your house. You can't cross the state border. You can't go to Canada. You can't get on an airplane. You can't, like at any point and that can happen in real time, because that's part of the satellite GPS communication system. And increasingly, if we lose access, and I'm not a big car person, I have to say, like, I would love to be in a place to not have to have cars dominate our society. But realistically now, if they remove people's cars and then make them incumbent on public transit or other alternatives, they can seriously limit your mobility. If these car share programs or Lyft or ride shares demand a passport to get on a bus, to get on, to unlock an autonomous vehicle, to get in your Lyft, like they can very seriously constrain people's ability to go any further than they could walk or go on a bike if they implement these programs.
That's funny you bring that up, because in that investment group that I'm a part of, there's a lot of talk about, and there's a lot of money, as you know, in autonomous, not just autonomous driving, but they're automating everything, robots, and I think, I sent you that video from Venture City. I don't know if you actually watched it. It was like 20 minutes, but they're telling you yeah, we're just going to replace everything with artificial intelligence and robots, and it's going to be wonderful. And then you're going to go to space.
I don't want to go to space. I know. But see, nobody's having these conversations. They're just saying, we're doing this, by the way. You're going to be a cyborg, by the way. Just get used to it. And I'm like, we don't have to be cyborgs. I mean, we don't have to, that's what I'm saying. It's like this Wetiko crazy white Western, something went wrong somewhere down the road that we would think that we are gods, that we're going to be digital, because it's not good. It's not good. So I have one last map if you want to see it, and then
let's do it. We might as well.
Last one. I know some people like looking at these maps.
I love these maps. I mean, because I'm a visual person. We're talking about it, but to see it and you make the connections and stuff.
Right. Well, so I was trying to figure out where did Bridge International Academies come from? How did it show up on the scene as this model? Because clearly it's being shaped as the model for global investment, and
right,
at scale, right? Because these investors are always like, how do we scale this disruptive innovation? So I was trying to figure out where it came from. And so Shannon May was one of the co-founders. And so here's Seth Andrew again. So just remember this degrees of freedom. He's part of this, virtual reality school, tying kids from Harlem. But she was a co-founder, and she actually got her start as an anthropologist, which I think is interesting, because it always seems like deep state people are anthropologists. So she was part of this program in China for sustainable development, tied to Agenda 21, and that they were going to make over this town.
I'm sorry. Can you tell people what Agenda 21 is? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, Agenda 21 is, oh gosh, was it it was in Brazil where they all got together around like the Millennium Development Goals. So these preceded the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was sort of the first steps towards like, climate change, sustainability, and this idea that we are going to have quote unquote green economies and smaller footprints and sustainability. But a lot of it was also about linking, like pushing these mega city regions and removing people from the land base, really. So I think the land base could be opened up for more extraction. So there was the Sustainable Development Goal pilot project in China called Huang Baiyu, and she was the anthropologist in charge. And I think that did not actually go that well. And she did some research on what's called a low-cost private school model. And that's what bridges would be considered probably, is this idea of, a lot of countries don't have access to public schools. There are schools with fees. How can we find a price point that impoverished people can pay to have their children educated so that these investors can make money? And this low-cost private school model. And it was developed additionally by the UK Department for International Development. Again, they were part of working with the World Bank on this data portal and the SABRE system, so the data analytics. So they're like, how can we, quote unquote, educate children, but also create revenue streams for impact investors? So she was a researcher in this area of low-cost private schools. She came out of like this sort of cultural anthropology background in sustainability in China. And okay, so that's that part. And then the thing that I wanted to point out is that increasingly we are going to be looking at new school models coming out, like micro schools and alternative homeschools and pod schools and these things where people are like, I am so sick of all this stuff that's going on. Give me something, right? So clearly the United States is not going to have exactly a Bridges Academy model, which is like $2 a day and you get your, MIT Media Lab people deliver your curriculum and the teacher reads it in front of the class. That isn't going to be exactly the model, but there will be a similar model. And I found it very interesting that the head, this guy, Bernie No, who is the head of school at Lakeside High School. And Lakeside High School is, Bill Gates went to Lakeside High School and his children went to Lakeside High School. It's a very elite high school in Seattle.
Wow.
Paul Allen, who is tied to impact investing in education spaces and also brain science and the Center for Brains and Machines, also Microsoft. He's an alumni of Lakeside and a donor. His wife, who's connected to all of this, is an alumni of, so it's a very elite high school. And the head of school, and he's been head of school for years and years and years, and he was also the board chair of the National Association of Independent Schools. And he had a background at Sidwell Friends, Landon School, the American School in Switzerland, the American School in Israel. Like he's been around before he got to Lakeside, all at pretty elite spots. And oh, wow, I didn't realize that was, maybe that's something different. And he created this thing called a Global Online Academy. So Bernie No is looking at new business models. He's not just about providing elite education to the future Bill Gates, Paul Allen, alumni. He's trying to figure out how can Bill Gates and Paul Allen make more money on a different education model and how can it be branded? So they were coming up with an alternative, sort of like Lakeside School Light, like the lower cost product. And so it was more of a drop-in center, and they had it they have one in downtown Seattle, and it's framed as a micro school. And these micro schools are sort of channeling the pod school model that were advanced by COVID-19, right? And then we were hearing that earlier on in the spring, like, oh, maybe you should have a pod school or a homeschool model with the pods, pick your pod. And that these pod schools are similar to a micro school where a lot of your learning is online, and then you might go out in the community and do projects. And increasingly with wearable technology, some of these projects that you do can be tracked and turned into data for badges. So like a gamified environment, like a Pokemon Go environment of education. So, this model is underway, and I just wanted to draw people's attention to it because I think increasingly this education space is going to be looking for new outlets. It's not strictly going to be homeschool or cyber school or charter schools or public schools or fully private. It's going to be these hybrids, and they're going to involve apps like Neo World. They're going to involve some level of online delivery, like this Global Online Academy, you know, the TED Talk education model. It's going to involve some level of on-site learning with games and badges and wearable technology. And they're going to sell these as sort of step downs, like, oh, you know, you've lost a lot of your economic buying power in the lockdowns. Well, maybe you still can't afford a lakeside high school, but maybe you could, you know, afford our lower price version, like our cut rate version. And there's actually a document that I found where he talks about Mr. No, like, has developed a slide share talking about how do you cut out costs of an elite private school and still make it workable. Like, you put more technology in, you reduce staff, you reduce facilities. Like, he's just really laying out like a business model for this new product, which is this.
Oh, you mean to tell me even at the elite schools, because I've been arguing, and this is really good. Thank you, Allison, because now you've got my wheels turning. Because I have been arguing that you
want me to go back? Sorry.
Yeah. So I have been arguing that this model of education, this online digitization, full digitization of education, is going to be reserved for poor and working class kids who won't have any other choice, kind of thing. But you're saying even the elite schools are going to be doing this.
Yeah. I mean, I think increasingly there will be these vouchers, right? Like, you know, they'll give you a Fed wallet. They'll give you a digital wallet, and it will be preloaded with a certain amount of money depending on your income. And I think in many respects, like, we've heard a lot in the education space around weighted student funding, right? And I agree that surely students with more complex needs, you know, students who are coming out of, you know, economic uncertainty, or who have learning differences, who have language, you know, English isn't their first language. Yes, they need more resources, but it's being sold as these resources will go to school districts and they will use them to benefit the students in those districts. My feeling is the plan has always been that those, the weighted funding will go into digital wallets for individual students. And unfortunately, what that means is that the amount of money that's going in that wallet is never going to be enough to adequately provide for those students' needs. And they'll say something like, oh, now you can use your wallet to buy hippotherapy. There's never going to be enough money in that wallet to provide every poor kid what they need. They're not going to give that money up. They're not. They're going to make you scramble for it. They're going to give you something that will let you maybe do 85% online education and a few in-person activities, right? And once you use that wallet, the data will be given back because it will be part of the income revenue stream. And my worry is that the students who are most at risk will be awarded the largest wallets, even though those largest amounts will still probably be inadequate to the need. And then those families of those children, unless they are very savvy advocates, they will become targets of sort of predatory business models, because they will be the ones with the money.
Wow.
I mean, that's my worry. And that those families may not be able to now, like, I mean, surely I know that there are some, you know, parents of special needs kids that are very, very, you know, powerful advocates and who have the resources to do that work, but not everybody does. And I think about English language learning parents. How are they navigating this? You know?
Parents with students with disabilities. I have a couple of friends who have kids who have, you know, I think out of her 3 boys, 2 of them actually have a disability. So yeah, it's definitely, this is tragic in a lot of ways.
It hasn't all happened yet. Like, that's the thing. I'm trying to tell people what I see happening based on historic precedent, right? Like, how we know how this machine has worked.
Yeah.
And we know how they use philanthropy and grants to control, to make it very difficult for people to oppose these systems.
So that brings me to this question, like, because that was one of the things that came up from our last conversation is like, you know, what do you think some solutions are? Like, what can people actually do? Because I actually saw that earlier. Somebody like, I need to opt out. So, like, what can, from your perspective, what do you think we can do? I mean, since you're right, you just pointed out accurately that this has not scaled. Like, it's happened in some places, but it hasn't scaled yet.
Um, I mean, I think a lot of it is like we need to fight for humans. I mean,
Yeah.
we need to fight for the human experience. We need to fight to not to automate our education, to not be framed as data for whether it's predatory health interventions, whether it's predatory um, education interventions. I mean, somebody has to say no to Stanford Smart Toilet, right? Like, and then unfortunately now everyone is so like there are many people who have been conditioned to be so afraid of their bodies, bodily function. They probably be excited to have a smart toilet. Like, but for those of us who aren't, like, we need to find a space. But the challenge is I think this is being enacted by the Klaus Schwabs of the world. Like, this is not anybody we elected. I mean, the people we elected are all going along, and both parties are going along, and in many respects, because it depends on a social safety net, the Democrats and progressives and liberals are more on the leading edge, right? Because it actually relies on the programs that they advance. But we need to expose it and call it for what it is. And I think, how do we, I need to better communicate it in a pithy way and to frame the narratives. There's some folks who I think are going to try to help me do that better. Because it is overwhelming and it does feel disempowering. But I do believe that most people would not want a world where their children are managed by avatars.
Right.
I mean, that's,
Right.
but we have to, I don't want to live in the world that they're building. I guess that's what I'm just saying. I don't, I've had 50 plus good years, so I can't complain, right? It's my turn to like suck it up and call this thing out. Not everybody, I'm not saying everybody else would necessarily make the same choice. But those of us who can have to speak up, because what is the alternative? I am fearful. I know that there are groups of people who are working on like mutual aid systems and alternative systems. And I really respect that. I think mutual aid.
I'm one of those people who wants to do that, like benevolent societies, African Americans. I made a post about that the other day, actually. African Americans built benevolent societies and, mutual aid, like at the turn of the 19th and 20th
Yeah.
century, after we were, chattel slavery was ended. And of course, the government provided literally no support, really,
Right.
like in mass, right? We never got our 40 acres and a mule. People talk about that. But so we had to coalesce and come together and support ourselves. And I was making a point the other day, like, I mean, we're on our own. These people in Congress came up with $600. And did you hear the latest? Did you hear the latest? That people who haven't already received the $600, if you go to the IRS's website, they say, oh, just claim it on your tax return, and it's, it'll just be like a tax write-off. So they're not actually
giving
nuts.
money.
Right. That I just saw somebody post about that today, and it made me livid. And I said, we're wondering why people now. I'm gonna say this now. People go, oh, MAGA. I don't agree, like with MAGA or their, like the reasons why they stormed the Capitol. But if people think that revolutions don't like have violence, I don't know what fantasy world they're living in.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. These people haven't sent money to the people. And I know, like, that's what MAGA wasn't doing that, but I'm like, okay, everybody else, what's up? Like, they're not meeting the needs of the people, period.
Yeah, I know.
They're only responding
that's why I feel like it's so hard that, like, I don't know. I have a young adult child who doesn't understand why I'm talking about this, and they feel like I'm perhaps on the wrong. I don't think they actually think I'm on the wrong side, but because there are so many other people who are in this position who are aligned with my values, they don't understand. And I said, I can't not continue this work. It's too important. But if we feed the ground on this to people who cannot fully represent the nature of the situation and the needs of the community, that's a terrible thing, I think. And those of us who can speak to it need to, because the consequences of not, like, I mean, I didn't get, I think I forgot, I slipped on the nanotech, but there are papers that have been developed over the last 10 years out of Georgia Tech with this, nanotechnology, where they're talking about using cells as substrates to turn us into computers and to create synthetic ubiquitous computing systems where they can read our thoughts. And, where you have biosensors that are not removable from your body, and that, this idea of bioengineering is just normalized at a population level. And that we know that the level of environmental contamination that has already happened by the chemical companies and by the military, who's to say that that is not already full on? Alana Freeland is someone who's done a lot of work in that area in transhumanism. And so I just don't feel like this is something that we can sort of brush aside as a small issue. Like, literally, we are at the threshold of having the capability of obliterating natural humans that are not part of a cybernetic system, like within a generation. And that is, to me, that is essentially like a genocide. A global genocide. And, and these are people, again, who are steeped in eugenics, who are steeped in like white supremacy, who are steeped in science knows best, but only a certain kind of science.
Yeah. Now the new mantra, follow the science. They've been conditioning that in people, follow the science, follow the science. And I'm like, Jacob A. Carruthers, who was an African-American intellectual and academic, said science is not neutral. Like, it's just not.
It isn't.
That's a famous quote from him. I wanted to bring this up because, talking to you actually inspired me to grab this book again. When we moved from Ohio to Maryland, I think I tagged you in it on Facebook. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that little short clip. But you are a lot like Samuel Yet. He wrote this entire book back in 1971 that peeled back a lot of layers like you did. And he actually...
Oh, is that the one, that the event, the evening? Yeah.
It was very...
When you start peeling it back, it's like, whoa.
And he was the first African-American journalist, Washington Bureau journalist for Newsweek. This was back in 1971. And they fired him when he wrote this book because he just told the truth. And he used all these, basically from the government. And now this book, of course, is out of print. He has passed on. I believe he passed in 2011. But I have actually been doing a reading series because the book is $700 on Amazon. Talk about predatory.
Yeah, they don't want those books out.
They don't want these books out, right? No. And that's what I said. I said anytime, and it is.
That's like when I got Mary Bunny's books. I was like, oh, this is pricey. That must be a good one.
And that's what. And yeah. And so, but you remind me of him, and thankfully he wasn't shunned by the entire African American community. Lots of people supported him, including Dick Gregory and other people. And came to his defense. But the problem is that most of the things that he predicted would happen ended up happening because I guess we just weren't able to organize the masses of people because the tools of social control are so strong, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. And if people feel like they're going to lose their jobs or something like that, they're just not going to say anything. Or if it is their job, to push certain things.
Right.
That's where you get a lot of the African American kind of managerial class, and he talks about that in his book, and that's why, like, you don't have to say it. He calls it out, like even back then.
It's been an education. And I think for me, that's why it's been hard, because in some of the framing of how one is supposed to do organizing is that people like me are supposed to just sit back and do what other people tell me to do. And for whatever reason, I feel like I've been put in a position to see this, to do this work. And that, I'm not going to chase people down and say, you need to listen to me because I'm important. I do need to find a way out. You know, for the longest time, I said, if I have to tell the, white Unitarians not to put babies on blockchain, or the Mormons not put babies on, that's who I'll talk to, if that's what
do you want to talk about that experience, like for you? Because I do think that's critically important, and because it actually mirrors my experience. I know you've mentioned, that you certainly don't identify as right or anything like that. But it's been people who people would describe as the right or conservative who have been most open to listen to what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of people who are skeptical of the government, right?
Libertarians,
And libertarians, and I really, I will say I'm a recovering liberal. I guess I'm a recovering leftist. Like, I'm like, oh, we don't do liberal, we do left. Okay, we'll do left. Like, oh no, it's not. Like,
I'm with you.
Like, I mean, everybody I thought would be with me. I'm like, why are we like listening to what you think the state is doing? We're going to demand to stand aside so the state can give us, like, none of it made sense to me. And part of it is like, is this neural dust already out there? They already flipped the switch, and somehow, like, people keep saying, you must not drink the fluoridated water, but,
right.
But I'm not going to change my, I am welcome to debate. Like, I'm happy to debate my findings or the facts, or to assess what I'm talking about, because I'm not saying mine is the only viewpoint.
Sure.
The thing that is the most, there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of non-response, non-engagement. And among people who I know are, it's hard. On the one hand, it's both intellectuals. It's people who sort of groom themselves as being intellectuals. And I know that they can, like, they're more trained in this than I am. And then on the other hand, there are people who say, Alison, you're talking at too high a level. It's too hard. You need to break it down. Which is why I try to mix it up with like construction paper and fairy tales things occasionally.
Yeah, storytelling is very impactful. Sure.
Well, and that's why I'm hoping, like, I found some folks actually who found me through your last talk who it seem to have skills in that area. So that's like, I have I have certain talents. I do not have all of the talent. So
you have a very important talent that,
I have the synthetic talent. I have the, like, way too much information. Let me scare the crap out of you talent. But I now need the talent to say, how do we put all of this stuff in a way that feels compelling, but actionable? I guess that's the question. And people keep saying, well, what are your solutions? And I'm like, well, first,
we get a lot of that. Yeah.
Collective. Like, I think what we're building, it is not going to be anything that we've had. If we are successful, we have to build a new thing, and it has to be built on history, and it has to be built collectively, and it has to prioritize addressing how we got here in the first place, which is the enslavement and the genocide. And so while I am more than happy to participate in such discussions, I certainly am not going to be the sole person to roll out the solution, because that would go against everything that I actually believe.
Yeah. And
we can't get to that point until we mobilize sufficient people to actually have the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I feel like this conversation between you and I, and all the podcasts that you're doing, and conversations with different communities. I know you talked to somebody in Japan like last week, right? Like,
yeah, that was just like, but they were the ones who gave me the paper about, like, the Society 5.0 cyborg avatar capitalism. So, I mean, it's a gift. Like, to do this, to meet people over things that matter, is a gift.
Yeah.
And as awful as what we're dealing with, but we are gifts to each other. And I have been blessed with, like, many caring, amazing people who have, like, shared with me and supported me, and, given me, space to talk, and given me knowledge, right? Because I was in the same conversation, because I was trying to put together this letter for Zach Push, this farmer. And I said, it's kind of like a compost pile. Right now,
wow.
We've got all of this stuff. Like, I'm the compost pile. Like, people throwing stuff in, and I throw a bunch of stuff in, and then, like, we mix it up, and then we get some heat to it, right? But it's not. If you just throw grass in a compost pile, it just stinks. Right. So it's that vitality. It's that everyone sort of pitching in and saying, well, this is my experience. This is what I saw. This is this article. This is my take on it. This is, that allows the connections to deepen.
Yeah. Well, I think a part of that, is what we're doing here is trying to get this information out. Like I said, it's gained a lot of traction, and people are wanting to start to at least ask questions. I do feel like people will probably have to do sort of like follow some of the maps that you have made and like go down their own road to do a little bit more research to like really get it to sink in. Because that was actually one of the feedback comments that I got from a friend who sent it directly to me, and he's like, I think I'm gonna have to watch that video like and break it into pieces,
Yeah.
right? And like go and look up somebody that she said, or like go and research this person or that company or something like that before I can feel strong enough to actually organize around it. Because I think there's a lot of fear because number one, there are people on the market side of things, like on the investor side, saying this is disruptive innovation. This is always good. We disrupted when we created electricity. We disrupted when Henry Ford created the automobile. Like, this is good. This is like a natural thing. We should applaud this. And there's people like that. And then there's people that are like, um, well, kind of like just apathetic or indifferent,
Yeah.
like, well, of course. I mean, why not have the biometric scan my anus? It might help with colon cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I mean, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that if there are people who want to live that lifestyle, it shouldn't come at the cost that those of us who don't want to live that lifestyle don't have the option.
Got it.
That is my concern around pervasive nanotechnology and possible geoengineering that they're talking about and other things is that.
Oh, that was the final question I wanted to ask you. And I'm sorry you said, I'm glad you said that. And I'm sorry. It's connected also to the investor group that I'm in, and there is a ETF that is invested in what's called the genomic revolution and CRISPR technologies. Is any of that connected?
Well,
Like the
CRISPR, I mean,
genomic?
gene editing, right? So that's the
Yeah,
synthetic biology. And like, I'm in
eugenics.
Philadelphia. So last year, Penn did the first human CRISPR trials. So, if you understand the way DNA works and it's coding really, like there's only certain numbers of letters of bits, that are in the, the twist. It's actually code. And actually, Gates, well, actually, maybe it's just Microsoft, but they've developed readable and writable DNA. So they're doing data storage on DNA now. And then the question is, I think that this DNA is synthetic or it's in vats or something, but they've done readable and writable DNA data storage. Because if you can imagine creating a digitally twinned world, there's huge amounts of data that must be stored. And so they've developed this technology of storing it in DNA, which they say is very efficient. And it's essentially programming. So then my question is, at some point, do we become repositories of data storage? Like, are we going to, like, are they going to take it out of vats and put it in people? And there are ways in which nanotechnology and synthetic biology through use of electronic waves can really like change up your DNA structures. And some of this is genomic medicine.
Yeah.
But I would say a lot of the genomics is based in illness. And so essentially what we're doing is creating giant revenue streams in illness, which means there's absolutely no incentive to create a healthy environment, right? Like if there's no incentive to ever heal people, like actually there's an incentive to poison people so you can create revenue streams for chronic illness.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that I need to get further into the Arthur Furstenberg book, The Invisible Rainbow. It's about the history of electricity. But in the first chapter, they talk about illnesses that really didn't exist before electricity, like in your home. And that like diabetes and heart disease went up sky high, that there really wasn't diabetes or heart disease in any kind of chronic population level way before electrical systems. Which to me is very, very interesting when we think that diabetes and heart disease are impact markets that are going to be coming online with Health Goal 3, and that they're going to put Fitbits on people and tell them to go out and, have good health behaviors. What if it is the environment that is harming them?
Wow.
It's crazy.
Well, this has been great. I mean, again, like you just blew it away. I mean, there's so much information in this. I'm sure this one will probably go viral like the last one did. There'll be lots of people sharing and talking about it. And, probably I think it could be used as an organizing tool, like to have like small discussion groups, like how people have book clubs, to try to like figure out a lot of this stuff, and at least people can start to ask questions because it's already coming up. I don't know if you know, like California and Arizona have already approved, um, autonomous driving. Like,
Yeah.
they've
Well,
approved it
Michael
on the.
Crow is in Arizona, right? And the thing is,
Oh,
Arizona had done debit cards for education vouchers. So this is the other thing. And my friend who's very intuitive about these things, she said, so they have these debit cards. So that the Fed wallets are not that far off of a debit card. And they would award families vouchers to use for educational curriculum. And she said what happened was that there were cases where there was fraudulent use of these debit cards. And so say a family went to Target and they bought curriculum or games or something with it, and then they would return it and then use the cash to buy something else. And so, but what my friend said was, for families in poverty, that is setting them up for fraud.
wow.
Because essentially what you're doing is providing people who may not have any other way of feeding their families, putting a terrible choice in their hands, right? Do you commit fraud with this education voucher and feed your kids, or do you not? Like it's a very hard situation to be in. And so in some ways it feels like it's setting families up to be pulled into this net of the judicial system.
Anyway, I actually thought that, not that the debit card, I didn't know about that part, but in this COVID moment, like I have been thinking more about, how can parents be compensated in some way, because especially in this virtual environment, there are added costs. I know there have
Oh,
been for
sure.
us. And that's actually been something we've been talking about too, just as a network. Like, how can we get more support to parents?
Well, and I think like outside of an impact market, like if you actually had a functioning government, like if Goldman Sachs and Google were not your government, right, then you would not have austerity, and Amazon would pay their taxes, and people wouldn't have offshore bank accounts in the Caribbean, and that you would actually
Yeah,
have the resources you need to take care of your people. And
yeah,
ultimately that's what needs to happen.
yeah,
Like the people of the world have to reclaim that power so that the people can be taken care of, that they aren't left as just shells that are impact data commodities, which is how they want to treat us, as disposable.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Allison. This has been great.
Yeah. Don't
Um,
give up
you
though.
know,
I mean, see, I believe in moms. I do
yeah,
believe in moms. I mean, I don't believe that this world is what we're going to end up with, this thing that they have planned. But we have to tell people. We have to tell people, and then we have to hold people up.
yeah, yeah, we have to. And this has been great. Allison, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this knowledge. Giving of yourself is certainly a remarkable act, in my opinion, to share and connect all these dots for us. You put in hours and hours of research, and this is like whoever told you is like PhD level stuff, and you have to break it down because some of these terms we've never heard before. So anyway,
I
hopefully
can
you'll
have a
come
MOOC.
back. What was that?
I can have a MOOC, one of those
Yeah,
massive online whatever courses.
yeah, yeah. You
Mandatory
should.
standards.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, this has been great, man. I really appreciate you. And hopefully you'll come back.
Yeah,
In the
yeah.
future. I'm
I got
sure
I
there's.
got some new good stuff to dig into. I have to just get access to Little Sis again.
I know. Well, that to my friend's point, I didn't see her in the comments today. Is she works in the technology field, but that's her goal. Is like for like the abolitionists, I'll call it that, who want to set up their own kind of like tool like that, so that we can't that no like the same people that we're talking about doesn't control it. She's trying to get more people, more Black people, and more people of color to learn how to create these systems, so that you can know how to undo it, or at least know how to stop, or, if you don't stop it completely, you can slow down the moving train a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's some very good people who are working in to untangle this and figure it out. So yeah, I think that's an interesting mutual aid space, is like co-learning
Yeah,
outside of these coding boot camps that have these income sharing agreements and things attached to them. Like, how do
right,
communities support each other in getting these skills?
right, exactly. All right. Thanks
All
everybody
right.
for coming in, and we'll see you all next week, 8 p.m.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everybody.